The call across the stars. The stars hung in the silent dark like cold, watchful eyes. Nothing moved except the faint drift of dust and the slow crawl of light across the void. Then a sound, thin, broken, and desperate, cracked through the static. It was a voice, trembling, speaking in an alien language. But the tone was one no translation program needed. It was the sound of fear on the far side of the galaxy. The Zelari homeworld was burning. Cities once shining with crystal towers now lay in ruin, their streets choked with smoke and ash. The Kreth Dominion's warships hung in orbit like vultures, raining fire down without mercy. The Zelari were no warriors. Their culture had thrived for thousands of years on trade, art, and knowledge, not war. When the Kreth came, they had no fleets, no armies, only a hope that someone would hear their call. And so the signal was sent. It went out in every known communication band, every emergency frequency. It carried coordinates, a plea, and one word that cut through any translation barrier. Help. Across the galaxy, it passed through the Yala, territory of great powers. Some heard it and looked away. Others recorded it, sighed, and erased it from their archives. None dared face the Kreth. The Kreth had defeated fleets twice the size of any that dared oppose them. Their empire stretched across 100 star systems. Their shadow was long, and those who stood in it rarely stood for long. But in the outer reaches of the Sol system, a different kind of listener caught the signal. The listening post on Titan was manned by only a handful of humans. Their job was mostly to monitor deep space transmissions for navigation errors, lost ships, or pirate chatter. Lieutenant Commander Rafe Dalton was sipping cold coffee when the sound reached him. It cut through the hum of machines and the scrolling. Lines of data. The voice was raw, pleading its rhythm, a desperate heartbeat in the void. Dalton's eyes narrowed. He tapped in commands, letting the computer run translation layers over the message. As the alien words formed on the screen, his jaw clenched. Zelari homeworld under attack by Kreth Dominion, requesting immediate assistance. He didn't need to read further. The name Kreth was enough. Humans hadn't forgotten their first meeting with the Kreth. It had been during the Wars of Expansion, a century ago. The Kreth had treated Earth as nothing more than another target. They had burned colonies, slaughtered civilians, and left scars that had never faded. The peace treaty had ended the fighting, but not the hatred. For humanity, the Kreth weren't just enemies. They were a wound that had never healed. Dalton opened a secure channel to Sol Defense High Command. The transmission was short. Signal received from Zelari system. He reported, "They're under Kreth attack." He paused, his voice hardening. Recommendation: deploy the Deathworld fleet on Earth. The words fell like a hammer in the war room. The Deathworld fleet was a name whispered with both pride and dread. It was humanity's final deterrent, relic of the war with the Kreth. The ships were massive, overarmed, and armored to the point of madness. They had been built not to defend, but to end wars. Officially, the fleet had been retired, scattered to reserve docks, or scrapped. Unofficially, the cores were still powered, the weapons still ready, waiting for the day they were needed again. The Admiralty listened to the Zelari transmission. The room was silent except for the sound of the alien voice breaking. When it ended, Admiral Koran-scarred veteran of the Kreth War spoke. "They asked for help," he said slowly. The others turned away. He leaned forward, his eyes like steel. "But we are Deathworlders." Within hours, encrypted orders were sent to shipyards. On Titan, Luna, and the Mars orbital rings, hangar lights flickered to life over dark hulls. Dock crews ran like blood through the steel veins of forgotten giants. Names long etched into war histories shone again. Erebus, Leviathan, Black Star. The old crews were called back. Veterans who thought their war days were over answered without hesitation. Young recruits, barely out of training, boarded with wide eyes and grim faces, they all knew the stories. The Deathworld fleet did not go to rescue. It went to finish wars. Dalton watched from Titan's control tower as the fleet began to assemble. Against the black of space, their hulls seemed to swallow the stars. No music, no ceremony, just the steady hum of engines waking from decades of silence. Somewhere out there, the Xylari were still sending their call. Somewhere out there, the Kreth believed no one would come. Dalton allowed himself one thin smile. "They'll come," he whispered. "And they'll wish they hadn't." The orders came down from the Admiral himself. All ships, prepare for slipstream jump to Xylari coordinates. The countdown began. On every bridge, captains checked systems. Crews locked weapons. Engineers cursed and coaxed ancient engines into life. In the docking bay of the Erebus, Marines stood in rows, armored and armed. Their sergeant walked the line, voice like gravel. "You've all heard the call," he said. "We're not here to play hero. We're here to make sure the Kreth never send another." Outside, the fleet's engines flared to life. The stars seemed to bend as slipstream gates opened. One by one, the ships vanished into the light. Heading toward a war the galaxy thought humanity had left behind. The call across the stars had been answered, and the answer was war. Asterisk, the fleet that shouldn't exist in the cold shadow of Saturn. Titan's shipyards lit up like a second sunrise. For decades they had been quiet, their colossal docks home to hollow shells of old warships. Most people believed those ships had been stripped for parts or sold to lesser fleets. That was the official story, the one politicians told when they wanted to speak of peace. But beneath the frozen silence, the truth had been sleeping. The Deathworld fleet was never truly gone. It had been hidden, piece by piece, in forgotten orbits and deep vaults. Every reactor kept warm, every weapon sealed but never dismantled. Each hull carried a history written in battle scars and the names of fallen worlds. And now, one by one, those giants were waking. Dock crews moved like ants over the steel skin of ships that could end continents. Welders repaired old damage. Painters scrawled new kill marks beside ancient ones. Engineers whispered to engines. Older than they were, in the command bays, computers hummed to life, projecting maps of star systems that would soon burn. The Erebus, lead dreadnought of the fleet, was the first to power up. Its silhouette was a predator's long, armored, and bristling with weapon arrays. The ship had fought in the siege of Helix 9. It had fired the shot that split a Kreth carrier in two. Its crew said the ship never forgot, and some believed it hungered for war. Across the system, similar awakenings rippled. The Leviathan, a siege cruiser with enough mass drivers to shatter moons. The Black Star, known for vanishing mid-battle and reappearing behind enemy lines. The Judicator, bristling with point defense guns like a hedgehog of steel. Each one was a legend. Us. Nightmare the galaxy thought had been buried. The call for crew went out. Veterans answered, first men and women who had sworn they'd never set foot on a warship again. They came limping in with prosthetic limbs, scarred faces, and eyes that had seen too much. They strapped on their old uniforms like armor. Alongside them came the young, the ones who had grown up hearing stories about the Deathworlders. They looked at the ships with awe, as if touching the steel might make them part of history. But this mission was not a rescue. It was not diplomacy. It was retribution. Orders were given in short, sharp sentences, no speeches, no handshakes. There was only work to be done. On the Erebus, Captain Lysa Wren kept her eyes on the data streaming across her command table. She was a quiet woman, but her reputation was carved into the bones of anyone who had served with her. She didn't raise her voice, didn't waste her breath on threats. Her enemies simply ended up dead. Now, she traced the Xylari system on the glowing map. Her face, unreadable. "They think no one will come," she said to her XO. "We'll prove them wrong." From the outer systems came reports. Kreth forces were tightening their hold on the Xylari homeworld. They were building planetary bombardment platforms. Every day they delayed meant more dead. That was why the order had been given with. No hesitation, no diplomatic council, no drawn-out vote, only a single command from the Admiralty. Deploy the fleet. As the final crews boarded, the air in the docks grew electric. Every clang of boots on steel echoed like a drumbeat to war. Weapons were loaded, fighters secured. Ammunition bays filled until the decks groaned under the weight. And still, there was no ceremony, no flags or speeches. The Deathworld fleet did not need to announce itself. When it arrived, the galaxy would know. The slipstream gates loomed, ahead glowing faintly. They had been calibrated for a jump straight into the outer edge of Zalari space. It was a dangerous move. Most fleets avoided blind warps into unknown combat zones. But the Deathworlders weren't most fleets. They thrived on risk. They fought best when the enemy thought they were too far to matter. Captain Wren stood at the center of the bridge, hands clasped behind her back. All ships. Her voice came over the comms, calm as ice. This is a one-way deployment until the Kreth are gone. Her crew answered as one. Understood. The fleet engines roared to life. A low vibration rolled through every corridor, shaking loose the dust of decades. On Titan, the dock crews stood back and watched the Titans drift free of their moorings. They were monsters made of steel and human will, and as they turned toward the gate, the stars themselves seemed to shrink away. In the war room on Earth, Admiral Corrin watched the telemetry feed. His hands rested on the edge of the table, his eyes locked on the glowing dots of the fleet. He knew once they entered Slipstream, there would be no turning back. The galaxy thought humanity had grown soft. Soon they would remember. With a flash of bending light, the first ship crossed the threshold, then the next, and the next, until all that was left in the dockyards was silence. The Deathworld fleet was gone, and somewhere, far away, the Kreth had no idea that their war was already lost. The first strike, the Zalare capital world hung wounded beneath a blood-red sky. Its once bright oceans reflected the fires of burning cities. The Kreth Dominion's fleet prowled the orbit like metal predators. They had grown careless, certain no one would dare challenge them here. Their warships drifted lazily, their orbital cannons raining destruction without pause. On the surface, the Zalari fought to survive among the ruins. Families huddled in shattered homes, listening to the endless thunder from above. Every few minutes, the ground shook as another strike tore a hole in the city. The air was heavy with dust, fire, and the quiet sobbing of those who had already lost too much. Hope had thinned to a whisper. Then space itself seemed to tear open, without warning. The slipstream gates ignited in the darkness beyond the moon. A ripple of blue light burst outward, and from that light came shadows enormous, silent and bristling with weapons. The Deathworld fleet had arrived. On the Kreth flagship Vertal, alarm screamed to life. Unidentified fleet detected. The sensor officer barked. The Kreth admiral's crest stiffened, his voice a growl. Identify them. The answer came moments later, tight with disbelief. Human ships. Deathworld class. The bridge fell silent. Even the Kreth knew the legends. The Erebus wasted no time with warnings. Its spinal railgun charged with a hum that vibrated through space. In less than 3 seconds, a tungsten slug fired at a fraction of light speed smashed through a Kreth destroyer. The ship split in two, debris scattering like sparks from a forge. No threats, no negotiations, only destruction. The rest of the fleet followed. The Leviathan's mass drivers tore apart a frigate squadron before they could form a defense line. Black Star vanished into stealth mode, reappearing behind a Kreth carrier to deliver a spread of fusion torpedoes. Explosions bloomed in the void, casting stark light over the battlefield. The Kreth scrambled to respond. Fighter wings swarmed out from hangar bays, but they were met by human interceptors, sleek, deadly machines that sliced through them in seconds. Human point defense systems lit the dark like a storm of fireflies, intercepting every missile before it could reach its mark. The Deathworld fleet didn't just fight, they dismantled. Every move was calculated. Every strike meant to cripple the enemy's ability to respond. On the surface, the Zaylari looked up from the rubble. For the first time in weeks, the sky was filled with a different kind of fire. Bright streaks of railgun slugs, missile trails, and burning wreckage falling from orbit. They didn't understand the scale of what they were seeing, but they understood one thing: the predators were being hunted. Inside the Erebus, Captain Lysa Wren moved like a conductor at the center of a violent symphony. "Target their orbital guns first," she ordered. "Clear the sky for our ground teams." Her voice never rose, yet every order cut through the chaos with perfect precision. Around her, the bridge crew moved without hesitation. They had trained for this moment. They had been waiting for it their whole lives. The Kreth flagship pulled back, trying to regroup with its escorts. Wren's eyes tracked it on the tactical display. "Keep pressure on them," she said. "Make them think the fight's already lost." But deep in the Kreth command chamber, their admiral's eyes glowed with rage. "Deathworlders, this will be your grave," he hissed. He ordered all remaining ships to form a spearhead and punch through the human line. It was a desperate move, one that would cost thousands of lives. But the Kreth didn't care about losses. They cared about dominance. The fleets clashed in a maelstrom of fire and steel. Wreckage tumbled through the void, pieces of ships spinning endlessly into the dark. On the Erebus, alarms flared as enemy fire raked across the armor. The crew stayed focused, feeding targeting data to the fleet. They weren't here to survive. They were here to win. Then came the moment. A gap opened in the Kreth formation, just wide enough for the Deathworlders to break through. Wren's lips curved in the faintest smile. "All ships," she said. "Advance." The Deathworld fleet surged forward, their weapons blazing. The first strike had been made, and the Kreth were beginning to realize they weren't facing a fleet. They were facing extinction. Asterisk. The ground war, the fires in the sky began to fade, replaced by the thunder of engines descending through the clouds. Dropships, black and angular, tore through the smoke like hunting birds. Each one carried squads of Deathworlder Marines, their armor dark as the void and marked with the scars of other wars. The mission was clear: secure the Zaylari capital, cut off Kreth command posts, and hold the ground until the last enemy was gone. The first dropship slammed down in the center of the shattered city. Its ramp dropped, and Marines surged out in perfect formation, weapons raised. Kreth soldiers, hulking reptilian brutes, turned too late. Pulse rifles spat streams of blue fire, cutting them down before they could aim. The Deathworlders didn't waste a single shot. Every pull of the trigger was deliberate. The streets were narrow, littered with rubble and the bodies of those who hadn't escaped the first wave of bombardment. Shadows moved between broken walls. A squad of Kreth tried to flank the human advance, but motion sensors picked them up instantly. The humans turned as one, unleashing a wall of fire that sent the ambushers crashing into the dust. Above, gunships hovered low, their cannons shredding enemy positions before they could fire on the advancing troops. Behind the human lines, combat medics moved with equal precision. One stopped beside a collapsed market stall, where a young Zaylari girl clutched her injured brother. Her wide eyes froze on the towering figure in black armor. The Marine knelt, removing his helmet, revealing a face lined by both kindness and war. "You're safe now," he said quietly, before turning to the medic. "Get them to evac." Every block the Deathworlders took was fortified instantly. Engineers set up drone turrets. Snipers took rooftop positions, and supply lines were established within minutes. They didn't just win ground. They owned it the moment they stepped on it. The Kreth fought like cornered beasts, roaring through the streets in armored crawlers. But the Deathworlders had trained for urban slaughter. They used every broken building as cover, every alley as a trap. Explosives were placed with surgical precision, turning Kreth advances into burning wreckage before they could reach the front line. By the third hour, the Kreth defense was splintered. Pockets of resistance were collapsing, their comms jammed by human electronic warfare. Still, the Kreth refused to retreat. It wasn't in their nature. They would rather die than admit defeat. And the Deathworlders were more than willing to grant them that choice. In the command post on the Erebus, Captain Lysa Wren watched the real-time feed. Icons representing her ground teams pushed deeper into the city. Her comms officer glanced up. "Kreth reinforcements detected," he reported, voice tight. Wren leaned forward. "Numbers." The answer came like a weight. 3 times our ground force. Incoming from orbit, on the streets, the Marines prepared themselves. They had taken the city's heart. But now the real test was coming. Gunships climbed higher, scanning the clouds for the shapes of incoming dropships. Distant thunder rolled not from the sky, but from the approach of Kreth war machines. Every soldier knew the odds. No one flinched. The sergeant of First Squad walked the line, his voice steady and cold. "Remember what you are." He told them, "Remember who's watching from above." He pointed toward the sky. "The Kreth think they own this planet," he said. "We're about to teach them what it costs to take something from Deathworlders." The ground trembled as the first wave of reinforcements entered the city limits. From the rooftops to the alley shadows, human weapons shifted to meet them. The trap was set. The war for the Zelari homeworld was far from over. But from the moment the first human boots touched the ground, it was no longer the Kreth's war to win. The trap in the void far above the burning city, the void was restless. Kreth reinforcements surged out of slipstream, their numbers blotting out the starlight. Destroyers, cruisers, and carriers formed a wall of steel, confident they could crush whatever stood in their way. They had come expecting a desperate defense. Instead, they were about to sail straight into the jaws of a predator. The Deathworld fleet was waiting, hidden among the debris fields and cold shadows of the system's outer ring. Their drives were silent, their hulls masked by stealth plating so black. It seemed to swallow light. The Kreth sensors scanned and found nothing exactly as planned. On the bridge of the Erebus, Captain Lysa Wren stood like a statue, her eyes locked on the tactical map, watching the Kreth fleet advance into the kill zone. "All ships," she said calmly, "hold fire until my mark." The comm channels went quiet. Every gunner, every missile tech, every railgun crew held their breath. The Kreth admiral on the flagship Vertal barked orders to tighten formation. They believed they were hunting wounded prey. What they didn't see were the hundreds of autonomous mines drifting just beyond their sensor range, each one armed with enough explosive yield to gut a cruiser. Then the moment came. Wren's voice broke the silence, sharp as a blade. "Now!" The void exploded, mines detonated in perfect sequence, tearing through the Kreth's forward line. Ships shuddered, hulls splitting, escape pods ejecting into the chaos. Before the enemy could regroup, the Deathworld fleet lit up the darkness with every weapon they had. Leviathan's mass drivers punched clean through enemy shields. Black Star reappeared behind the Kreth formation, loosing a spread of fusion torpedoes into their rear lines. Point defense turrets spun, cutting down incoming missiles before they could reach human ships. The trap was complete. The Kreth had nowhere to run. Their formation buckled, ships breaking apart under the relentless crossfire. Those that tried to retreat slammed headlong into cloaked railgun platforms the humans had seeded days earlier. Every escape vector was already blocked. This wasn't a battle, it was a slaughter. On the Erebus, targeting screens glowed red with confirmed kills. Wren didn't smile. She knew the Kreth, two well-cornered predators, always had one last strike. And then her comm officer's voice cut in. "Admiral, the Vertale is powering a planet-killer weapon." Wren's eyes narrowed. If the Kreth fired it, the Zelari capital would be nothing but ash in seconds. "All ships," she ordered, "punch a hole to their flagship now." The Deathworld fleet shifted formation instantly. Every ship aligned its guns on a single point. The space between them and the Vental of Feyre became a tunnel of fire. Kreth escorts were torn apart in seconds, their wreckage spinning helplessly. Into the void, the flagship loomed ahead, shields flaring under the storm of impacts. But the countdown on its planet killer was still ticking. The Deathworlders had seconds to stop it. Seconds before the world they had come to save would vanish in fire. Race against fire. The Kreth flagship Vortal loomed in the void like a black fortress. Its hull shimmered under the glare of weapon impacts. But the countdown continued, deep within its armored core. The planet killer's ignition coils pulsed with a growing crimson light. Once they reached full charge, nothing in the system could save the Zelari capital. On the Erebus, alarms screamed across every deck. Captain Lysa Wren's voice cut through. The noise, sharp and steady. Divert all power to forward guns. Shield grid priority front arc only. The crew obeyed without hesitation. Every gun battery roared, sending rail slugs, plasma bolts, and missile salvos into the Vertal's shields. They flared brighter with each hit, but refused to collapse. In the chaos, a new transmission cut through the fleet comms. It was Major Kale from the ground forces. Command, we found the weapons remote control hub. It's planetside. Static crackled over his voice. If we take it, we can stop the firing sequence. Wren's mind raced. A two-pronged assault fleet against the flagship. Marines against the control hub was the only chance. She keyed the channel. Kale, you have 5 minutes. On the surface, Kale's team moved through shattered streets toward the Kreth. Command Center. The building was a fortress of black alloy, guarded by towering war beasts with plasma cannons mounted to their backs. Drones scouted ahead, marking targets. Then the Deathworlders hit like a storm. Grenades flashed. Rifles tore through armor, and the beasts fell one after another. Inside, the corridors glowed with the crimson light of the weapons' power feeds. Kreth soldiers fought in brutal close quarters. Kale's squad advanced step by step, the countdown echoing in their helmet displays. Every second lost meant thousands dead. Above, the battle around the Vertal turned savage. The Leviathan took a full broadside and still pressed forward, its hull shedding molten plates. Into the void, Black Star made a suicide run across the flagship's bow, blasting its point defense turrets to give Erebus a clear line of fire. The void was lit with constant bursts of energy, each one a hammer strike against the Kreth defenses. Kale's team reached the control chamber with just over a minute on. The clock. The room was a nest of glowing conduits and alien consoles. At its center stood the Kreth commander, claws dripping with blood from the last defender he had killed. "You're too late," he snarled. Kale didn't answer, he fired. The Kreth dropped, and the squad rushed to the consoles. Above, Wren's gunnery chief shouted over the comms. "Captain, the countdown's slowing." The Erebus hammered the Vertal with a final railgun barrage. Punching through its main reactor housing, the flagship shuddered, explosions blooming along its spine. Then the planet killer's crimson glow faded to black. On the surface, Kale gave the word. "Command, the weapon's offline, in orbit." Wren allowed herself a single breath of relief. "Good," she said quietly. "Now finish them." The Deathworld fleet closed in for the kill. The Vertal tried to turn away, but the Erebus fired one last, perfect shot. The Kreth flagship broke apart in a silent bloom of fire. Its fragments tumbled into the void, glowing like the last embers of a dying fire. Asterisk wars end, but not peace. The wreck of the Vortal drifted in silence, its shattered hull bleeding debris into the void. The Deathworld fleet moved through the remains like wolves, passing through the bones of their prey. No celebration came over the comms, only the steady rhythm of status reports and casualty counts. Victory for the Deathworlders was never loud. It was the quiet knowledge that the enemy would never rise again. On the surface, the smoke began to clear. Zelari civilians stepped out from the ruins, blinking at the sight of human soldiers standing watch. Some wept openly. Others simply stared, unable to believe they were still alive. Deathworlder medics worked without rest, pulling survivors from rubble, patching wounds, and handing out rations to the Zelari. These warriors had arrived like storms, but storms that had swept the enemy away instead of destroying them. In the ruins of the Kreth Command Center, Major Kale and his squad freed the prisoners they had found in the lower cells. They weren't just Zelari, there were dozens of species, each wearing the scars of Kreth cruelty. Some had been held for months, others for years. When the cell doors opened, they looked at the humans with disbelief. One prisoner, his voice shaking, asked the question they all felt. Why would you risk so much? For us? Kale's answer was simple. Because no one else would. Above, the fleet reassembled. The Kreth survivors fled the system. Their once proud ships now limping wrecks. But the Deathworlders didn't pursue. Captain Lysa Wren's final message to the retreating enemy was broadcast openly across all channels. If you come again, we will finish what we started. When the Zelari leader addressed the human fleet, his voice carried the weight of a people reborn. You didn't just save us, he said. You showed the galaxy that the Kreth can. Lead. Wren did not answer. Her duty was done here, and the fleet had no need for thanks. One by one, the Deathworld ships turned away from the Zelari world, their engines igniting against the black. They left no banners, no monuments, only the unshakable truth that someone had stood between the innocent and the fire. And when the next desperate call crossed the stars, the galaxy would remember who had answered. In the quiet of the Erebus's bridge, Wren stood alone, her gaze on the shrinking image of the Zelari capital. The war here was over, but in her mind, the map of the galaxy still burned with other battles yet to come. Peace was a fragile thing in Deathworlder hands, and humanity was not done with the stars. Asterisk.